Okay, so welcome everybody. I did send this out to some people that had requested to be on the list that were new. I was hoping maybe some of them would join us, but it's great to mm, have us here. And we're sort of in the middle of this, or sort of closing actually, this study on what the Pathwork Guide has about, understanding of evil. And I think he may reiterate it here, but in the other two lectures, we're continually being, like sort of educated on the idea that it's not two separate forces, that it's not, good and bad or, good and evil, God and the devil, but it really is even the darkest aspects of our own nature were originally divine aspects that got turned into something dark. And that, so our job isn't to get rid of anything. Our job isn't to, make anything try to go away or cut it out of us or any like that. What we need to do is we need to, transform it back into its original divine essence. And so we don't want to be afraid or ashamed, of the dark forces within us. We need to take responsibility, ideally. And we do the best we can, It's like, and we do according to our capacity. And part of this work is to expand our capacity. So let me go ahead and start reading. This is like a lecture towards the end, 248. It was in February 8th of 1978 that it was originally offered, and it was kind of like a kind of overview and a revisiting of this concept that the guide had talked about before. Here comes somebody new, so I'll give her a minute so they can. Hi, Dee. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Hi.
So we're just starting, so I'm just introducing the lecture. And so today we're reading this lecture 248 from the Pathwork lectures called Three Principles of the Forces of Evil. And also it's on the personification of evil. So, my dearest friends, God's blessings envelop you. Jesus Christ is present here, warming you, giving you courage and love, truth and hope that is always justified. Turn to Him, for He is God's human manifestation. He is the cosmic Christ who transcends all human bickering, separatism, and me versus you attitude. When you look at this series of lectures, and he's talking about these later lectures, so this is the only one that we're having so far. From some distance, you will clearly perceive there is a profound meaning in their specific sequence. I'm going to just drop that and drop below, so we're not kind of reading through them or listening to this in order. So in this lecture, I wish to instruct you again about certain realities and laws concerning evil. It is very important that you understand more about this so controversial subject at this present moment. For many centuries, the power of evil was fully recognized. Humanity had a sense of the invisible and what is usually referred to as supernatural regarding both the forces of light and the forces of darkness, as well as their manifestations, their effects, their influence in your realm, and their personification as spirits, as angels, and as devils. It has always been said that the individual's free will determined whose influence would predominate in one's life. So we are talking earlier, yeah, which wolf are you going to feed, right? Even in Native American understanding, there's these two sides of us. So while human beings were still in their immature mental and emotional states, their wills were not sufficiently developed to make conscious, appropriate, and wise choices. The strength of their lower selves and their inability and unwillingness to face and therefore transcend the lower self frequently made them prey to evil influences. So in some ways, he's saying that, we've been on a long journey of development and evolution through many, many incarnations. And so, earlier on, and even some aspects of ourselves, because he says that, we're various aspects of ourselves are different levels of evolution. And sometimes we bring into any particular incarnation, maybe a less developed part, in order to work with it. So he says the lack of self knowledge is what inevitably led to a lack of self responsibility. And thus humanity felt victimized by evil spirits. Fear of them often led to submission to them. And this happened on a quite conscious and intentional level. The worship of Satan occurred openly, and when this was not the case, it certainly occurred unconsciously by choosing the influences that corresponded to the intentionality of the lower self. So in earlier lectures, there's a personal lower self, mostly it consists of the aspects of pride, self-will, and fear in us. And then, there's this lecture is like on a more of a universal and spiritual level, looking at the collective lower selves in a sense. So as history proceeded, a disconnection from the invisible world occurred, like the age of enlightenment and then the age of scientific, and so then, it was all just superstition, and so we stopped, thinking about it in these ways. And it says this disconnection itself is a manifestation of evil, as I shall explain more specifically later. Now I just want to say what I have often mentioned before. Evil and its manifestation must itself become the medicine to overcome evil, at least in the long run. Therefore, this disconnection from supernatural realities inevitably had regrettable effects. But it also created an arena in which people could no longer blame the devil for their own misdemeanors. They had to look within themselves to correct the effects of evil. So humanity had to go through a period of isolation and separateness from the invisible realities in order to grow into self-responsibility. However, what was ridiculed as superstition was in reality a half-truth. It is indeed a kind of superstition to make outside forces responsible for one's fate. Yet invisible forces do exist and do have their influences. So I want to just, remind people and invite people anytime to break in with questions, and I will just kind of periodically check in. So any questions or comments here? So in other words, we are dealing once again with a duality. Either the self is responsible for the individual's fate, or the angels and devils are. Humanity has matured sufficiently to be able to untie this duality. After a long period of concentrating on the self at the expense of invisible forces, the time has come when you can combine the two facets of reality and truly make them the one reality it is from our spirit world's vantage point. Although I have discussed the existence of these forces ever since my task with you began, for a considerable time we concentrated mostly on your own inner being with all its subtleties, and all the various levels of consciousness and their interactions within you and around you. Occasionally I did return to the power of the invisible forces, but always in conjunction with your own determining voice. You have begun to understand that to the degree your lower self is conscious, thereby enabling you to choose not to act upon it and pray for help to purify it, you are invulnerable to evil. To the degree you commit yourself to the will of the highest and dedicate your life to follow in Christ's footsteps, spirits cannot approach you. One of the things that I've learned is that a lot of this has to do with the heart center. And this is something that, in our culture, we're so much in our mental bodies and in our heads that we don't even realize. I mean, we know we're nice people and sometimes we feel our heart is generally open, but there's a lot more in that center. And so, I when I was first dealing with kind of these spirits and being a little more aware, at least of their effects. I could never see them or anything, but could feel them. And it was very unpleasant and often made me nauseous and stuff like that. And so, I was trying to figure out how not to, be entertaining them quite so much. And people would say, well, you have to close yourself or whatever. We have these apparatuses, and it was about a kind of mediumship they call transport mediumship. And I was supposed to learn how to close myself. And I couldn't figure out even what that meant or how to do it. And nothing ever seemed to work that I tried. And then one day I discovered that, oh, I don't feel the effects of those beings when I'm really in my heart, when I'm centered there. And so, there's this whole shift that I began to work with, that began to recognize, oh, when I'm truly in open-heartedness and in a space of, not my mind and not my defense, and and presence and light, that they can't, that they don't. I think they're sometimes you see them afraid of the light. Light repels them, something like that, maybe, I don't know. But that was my experience, just personally, in that. And so the decision, like, we can't just voice good intentions on the surface of our being, which is usually like our heads, right? The decision must penetrate the most hidden levels of your personality if you are to become the shining light that repels dark spirits. The purification process of this path is a deep-rooted system that totally renews the personality on all levels. My beloved friends, the time has come for you to understand more profoundly how you are an electromagnetic field that always attracts what is commensurate with certain levels of your innermost being. To attain this awareness completely and clearly, you need more information. For this reason, I should like to discuss 3 specific principles of evil. Your understanding of this material will prove immensely useful and will bring into clear focus your view of life in general and of your own life in particular. The first of these 3 basic principles of evil is the most obvious to humanity. The devil was always associated with the principle which aims to destroy and to inflict suffering at all cost. The separation between the self that perpetuates suffering and the victim who suffers is so great that the perpetrator is deluded into being unaffected by the further effects of his or her acts. We actually delude ourselves into feeling like, oh, we're winning, we're on top, and we don't feel and we don't care about, the being that's suffering. But, many of us are already sort of beyond in that in many ways, like we naturally sort of feel pain and grief over the fact that some people want to be on top and make other people on the bottom, right? And yet there might be very, very subtle ways that we still do this, right? So it's kind of like there's these really obvious things in our world right now that we can point to of this existence, but it's like everything in much more subtle ways still can exist within us. And so again, we have a profound capacity to help the world by doing our own even subtle purification. And the
I
guide
think
says that, go ahead, yeah,
I think the whole world is kind of set up right now on separatism, at least here in the US, and
absolutely,
being separate. Yeah,
yeah,
it's the job. We all go to work and have pride in your team and who's better and who there's always a winner and loser, separate, separate. Someone on top, someone loses.
absolutely.
And it's just like everything is kind of set up right now like that. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, it's very, yeah, it's extreme in its expression now, and it's in some ways I think it's like helping us consciously recognize and see it, right? Because it's so blatant in its way. And not only, I mean, it's also subtly in every little thing, in all of the systems and everything. So, but it's also, coming out of the woodwork, in these very obvious and blatant ways. And so I think it's part of helping us recognize, and it's also saying that this is a collective level of evil within humanity, right? And so as a part of the process of purification for us, that darkness has to be exposed and come into the light. And so I
I
think that,
agree. I think that's a good point that you bring up that um it is like all in our faces from on all these different levels to help us force us to look at it and deal with it. Like everything from war to politics to where you go to school, what class of money you have, what job you have, status, education, everything all across the board, credit, where your home is located, what kind of car you drive, what you look like, if you're fat or skinny. So it's
yeah,
like it's all in our faces of who's better, who's ranking, and so I think it's probably a good thing in that sense to force us to kind of choose what are we going to choose, humanity and love, or are we going to choose separate and judgment?
right.
You know?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it is like this, to really understand this force of separation in the sense of, like it's sort of, the guide says in one of the earlier lectures that all of the negativity and darkness and evil in a sense is originally divine, in nature. And then it became exaggerated, or it became distorted in some way, right? And so in a way, incarnation on the planet, like we do feel like we're separate. And yet if we look really at the science, and we even look at like all of the levels of things, we know it's all interconnected, and none of us could live without. It's like, so there's nothing truly separate. And yet each one of our souls is in a separate body, and has its own unique experiences. And so there is this exploration and a need, in a way, on in the earth, dimension, to experience this kind of individuation, right? And it's, how do we, and I think in the initial, immature ways, we get individuation out of separation, you know and then we also make a big issue out of it. He's better than I'm better than you, or you got this color skin, or whatever it is. And so we make a big issue out of that separation. But I think, in a way, we're trying to learn how to balance, and to me everything is like this balance. And so how do we balance our true uniqueness, our individuality, our differentiation, which is part of our beauty, our creativity, our uniqueness, our ability to, like, bring something into the planet that maybe has never been here before, because we've never been here before. Each one of us is absolutely unique. And so, the higher level of separation is this kind of capacity and wonderful gift of individuation that God has given us, right? But then, when we turn that into, the separation, this, it's like, you can even feel like I can set a boundary and say that's not okay, and ask somebody to not do that, or even, withdraw from them in a physical sense. But if I don't withdraw from my heart, then it's a boundary. It's not separation. But when people, like when we feel, this revulsion of this other person, and I just wish he's dead, or something like that, and I do that all the time too. So, but that is the kind of the effect of separation, right? And so we're trying to find this way that we can embrace, our unique and individuated states, and try to evolve out of these kinds of separation things that take us into evil. So the delusion of evil, in the case of the first principle, lies in the misperception that your brother's or sister's pain is not unavoidably also your own pain. And that's kind of like the temptation into separation is like, I don't want to hurt like you hurt. I don't want to be like you. I want to put you down so I can be above you. So I'm never going to be like you, and so this is part of what feeds into it. And then, we pretend that our brothers and sisters' pain is not unavoidably also your own. I mean, Chief Seattle said, everything we do to the earth, we do to ourselves, right? So not only our human brothers and sisters' pain, but everything we do to every other being. And so, we still have, even in the best of our hearts, a level of separation. And it's not like that we're bad or rejected because of that, but that is part of what causes our own struggles and suffering, and it is what adds to the you know darkness on the planet, and we brought it in. It may not have even been ours. One of the lectures, the guide says, we bring in our own karmic things, or we bring in parts of another lifetime that we experienced this issue and we didn't kind of quite you know find a way beyond it, and so it still sort of needs more evolution, and so we bring it in. But he also says that we bring in other other pain, like, just he says that there's specks of darkness throughout the universe, and our commitment is to turn every speck of darkness into light. And so as you know souls, we grab a piece of darkness and come in, and we grab 50% of our own of darkness and 50% of light, and then we see if we can try to transform, with the help of the divine light, these pieces of darkness that we brought. So instead of recognizing this basic truth, a person, whether in human form or as a discarnate entity, who is filled with evil, experiences excitement and pleasure when spreading destruction, suffering, and pain. So the second principle of evil is materialism. So separation is the first, and separation is what causes, destruction and painful, and hurting, sadism kinds of actions. The second principle of evil is materialism. This not only applies to the earth sphere, but equally and often even more to a variety of hellish spheres in which entities live in a totally disconnected way, convinced that the dead state of thickly condensed matter, much more thickly condensed than your living matter, is the only reality that exists. In such hellish spheres, the suffering is not the same as the suffering derived from the first principle, which was often depicted by visionaries in your earthly sphere. The second principle is less often understood and sensed. Visionaries have not seen the spheres corresponding to and manifesting this principle. I'll give one illustration. Imagine a life in which nature is totally absent. Nothing is alive. All is condensed matter. Nothing has flavor. By the same token, the entity's inner nature is equally inaccessible. Everywhere there is only deadness, mechanicalness, and alienation from all that is pulsating life within and without. Now, he's talking about this in a way as a hell realm, and we can talk about those, but, like, and this is a little darker than probably depression does feel, but I would say that you could be in that state here on Earth, and we would call it depression.
It
And so,
also sounds like some of the astral worlds you hear about,
exactly,
some of the
exactly.
ghosts where
That's
the
what
hungry
he's
ghosts and all of that live.
right.
Yeah.
Right. That's what he's describing basically, is that there is these levels of the lower astral, and the earth, he says, is like a place where, the longing for, there's 50-50 on earth of light and darkness, so that we have both influences. And then there are lower spheres where there's less light, and there are higher spheres where there is more light. And then the spheres are interconnecting and inter-influencing, right? They're not necessarily separate, and they're vibrational. And so we lower our vibration, we lower the sphere that we're inhabiting, right? Even when we're alive. And of course, after death, that's the same thing. If we die and we're in this low state of vibration, then we're going to go to that equivalent sphere. So there is no birth, no death, yet the unchanging existence here is not the eternal life that is truly heavenly. This manifestation is the distortion of eternity. It is hopelessness itself, as if no change were ever possible. Existence is totally mechanized. Such hopelessness, such hopeless kind of suffering, is neither more or less desirable than suffering through direct infliction of pain. It is simply a suffering of a different kind, corresponding to a different principle of evil. And I think for us, another way, and he may go into this, I don't remember, but, what's coming to my mind is understanding materialism, like, in a cultural sense, right? That our culture is like, doesn't recognize, and he was saying that in the beginning, we don't believe in angels and spirits and all of that stuff anymore. Everything is just material. and um and so I think that's a part of that. And then also that means that this life is all that matters, and the best thing to do with it is to build your ego, build your wealth, build your station in life, even though you're going to die, and it's not going to last forever. But somehow it seems for most of us that that's the extent of our understanding of the purpose of life. And so that's a very materialistic consciousness. So it should be easy to see that until fairly recently in your history, your earth sphere manifested the first principle of evil in a much stronger way, although I think we've digressed recently. In the last 100 years or so, the influence, this was in the 70s, right? With the appearance of With the disappearance of the superstitions, the connection with the subliminal levels of reality has also disappeared. The lifeline to pulsating reality and re-enlivening was broken. The result was an alienated reality in which humanity prided itself on its advanced state, advanced because the emphasis on matter actually did result in technological progress, but also advanced because human beings became the only reality unto themselves. This had its positive and negative ramifications. The positive manifestation brought people back to taking responsibility for themselves to some degree, and therefore led them to search within themselves to an ever increasing degree for the cause of their fate. It is not coincidental that at this point the human psyche became a matter of scientific study, with psychology as a helpful tool in this endeavor. The negative manifestation was that a life was produced which is not totally different from the second sphere of evil I described. These two principles have been known by spiritually aware people, since every principle and every aspect of spiritual reality can and frequently does also manifest as an entity. Two different kinds of devils were also recognized by some visionaries. So, we think of these forces as energetic forces, as vibratory forces, as invisible forces, and some visionaries actually see them as entities, as beings. So even our defenses, I remember reading, you know, Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan, and Barbara Brennan was originally a student of the Pathwork, and then her channel opened, and she began, receiving all this guidance about the aura and the energetic field and how to heal on that energetic level and open to school, but basically in her drawings, she shows pictures of the auras where these dark forces are kind of attached and affecting the flow of the energy of an aura. And she understands, like they're entities, right? And so we we have to think not all entities are human, or not all entities, are, like, I mean, they can be sort of thought forms, or they can be images, even, like, are kind of a form in the field. And then there's also these, a lot of our defenses, what helps us sort of, hold our body in a certain, tense stance or whatever, as a defense. That's a kind of like configuration of energies that are attached to us, and are, kind of like both holding us in a stasis, trying to, pinning us in a way, um, as well as, redirecting energy. And, we ask for that because that's what makes us feel safer. And we're
That's a thought.
familiar with these things, and we don't recognize, exactly that the defense feels like us at some level.
I have the ability to see spirits on people and
Uh-huh.
demons and things.
Yeah.
And um I find what we're reading to be like on point, like exactly like I see. And what you're saying about Barbara Brennan, I remember when I came across her books and her teachings, I was like, oh, finally someone else can see, because at the beginning it was just it was just kind of I didn't know what was going on. I was like, what in the world? I thought I was going crazy, but I've just now over time I've just observed and learned to recognize them. But and I find I do always just find it interesting to see why people have certain entities on them. And then I watch the causes or effects of these entities over
Right.
time as I interact with the people or see them at work or something like that. So
Right.
then you have people who don't believe in them at all. Like I'm a Reiki master, a lot of Reiki people don't believe it. And a lot
Right.
of times they have so many on them. They don't believe it. So I'm like, it's
We
the
all
whole
do,
world.
right?
Fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is, I mean, it is still, we're still kind of in this more, and it's funny because, they are entities, and I think it's, to me, I like personifying things, right? It gives a relational aspect to things, right? And but I think it really is like, we're not even mythic anymore, and like the mythic consciousness, like all the gods and heroes and all that, these were personifications of energies, right? And so, it's great to go back and forth, to have the personification and to have the sense of the energy, and like, it doesn't, it's, they're ultimately one and the same, but again, I think in a lot of the visionary kinds of things, like, the personifications come, they present with the energy, and then maybe it's within our imagination or our ability to perceive in some way that we begin to,
Yeah.
you know see these entities or these shapes, or the natures of them a little more. And I think even when we were in, training with Barbara Brennan, like, we would look at these things, and not everybody would say exactly the same thing. Everybody could see something or caught something there, but it was, so I think there is an element, also within our own perceptual capacities, and maybe even our own imaginations with it, that get blended in there. But
I agree. I kind of because I've seen a couple of people who will like they can draw or paint. I don't have that ability, and they'll paint exact. Like I've seen, there's this guy who's an artist in Illinois, and he makes sculptures and all of that. I guess, and he's contracted out by different public buildings and things. But I've seen some of his paintings. I never met the guy, but his paintings, he paints like the stuff that I've seen, and I'm like, oh, somebody else can see. But he's a Tai Chi master,
uh-huh.
is what but it's real interesting to see and then to see a lot of these how these entities what manifestation what illness and dis-ease they manifest as. And I noticed that there's a commonality, like there's certain ones that when I see it I already know it's, so all I
Right.
got to do is observe. It's to me it's like a science experience. I just
Exactly.
observe and see what the, yeah, just a confirmation. So I think it's interesting like how they're personified,
Mhm.
like there's just different forms. So I
And
think
the
what
guy
you're,
says, I like, what you're talking about. The guide says like they're more organized and orderly. He talks about he calls them negative specialists. And he says they're very hierarchical and specific as to what their function is and what they do. And that's the kind of what I'm hearing you say as well. It's like, um, and so, and they're, like, yeah, they attach to us where we also have that tendency. And in some ways they, can then exaggerate that tendency, maybe to the benefit of us waking up to it, right? Or understanding it more, and then,
Yeah, most of the time people think that it's them. So I've learned that when you get clear, my experience, I've observed, and I know for a while, Holy Spirit sent me down to be in like Miami, Florida area, so
mhm,
I could really see because there's a lot of people that come from all over the world down
right,
shopping and all
right,
that. So I got a chance to be down there for like 6 years. And what I realize is most of the time people think that that's who their mind, that's their own, and they don't realize it's usually these spirits talking to them and
mhm,
influencing their decisions or their
right,
thoughts a lot. And
right, right,
I've observed about 70, 80% of people over age 40 have in their like mid to late 40s have entities and spirits on them. So I'm like, this is really interesting. Yeah, and
hmm,
I was surprised it was high, but when as I observe people all around when I travel, I'm like, wow, it's the same. It's so I don't know. I think something happens with our aura, maybe our belief system
could
that
be, yeah.
attracts them.
It's like we have a kind of extra energy egg around us until then. And so it may be that that helps us, maintain a kind of more, clear space. But I think also, I mean, I think it's a little chicken and an egg issue because I think, yeah, they do whisper stuff to us, but they already know which stuff we might believe because that's already in us, right? So they are our tempters, but they already know what temptations we are subject to. So it's kind of like our own internal states actually are part of what, kind of magnetizes
Yeah,
particular negative specialists to us. And then those ones are most effective in, sort of causing us to, um, think that it's our thoughts or, follow in the darker direction rather than,
yeah,
choosing differently. And it doesn't really matter to me a lot, whether they think, you think that they're your thoughts or not. There's just a way in which I like to realize, oh, like everything is just so much more than what we understand, right? It's like
yeah,
we're two three-dimensional or something. And
yes,
and yet, it's like, some way the work is in recognizing simply the reality of the choice. We have free will, and
yeah,
that's the most powerful and important aspect of our divine inheritance. And
yeah. One of the things I find you said interesting, the chicken or the egg. I observed that a lot of people that get tattoos of beings, I can see some of those beings on them
on them,
before I even like I can see them when they're walking down the street before I meet them. And I always wondered the chicken or the egg, did they attract the being through the tattoo or did the being was on them and just,
right,
kind of
right, and
persuaded them to get a tattoo? But
yeah,
it's like it's really fascinating. I'm like,
yeah,
hmm. So
good example, yeah. Yeah, and I think the guide is pretty much saying, that it's like it's a co-creation, in a way, and we have to be. I mean, these entities can't attack us unless there's some invitation or opening, or and some part of our character that is connected in some way, So, and then when they do, like it is a way of feeling it more strongly, perhaps, or finding it, we're in a pitched battle for our life with it, but that at least now we're conscious and we're, aware that we need to, work something out here, and or that we're kind of got something with us that's causing. And sometimes it's an illness, like you said, where the fight in the medical thing can help, but oftentimes, it's like if it helps a lot more if we can also realize that most illnesses also have sort of emotional and spiritual source resource, aspects of them. Okay, so let's see. Okay, the third principle of evil is little known. although it has been only recognized in a vague way, perhaps as a byproduct of evil, but hardly ever as a powerful principle itself. It is as effective as the other two principles, and like them also has its own personification, hierarchy, and realm. It is the principle of confusion, distortion, half truth, and all the variations that may possibly exist in connection with it. And so I think, this is another thing that's like really rampant and much more intense in our world right now than it has been in a while. It's like all these half truths and distortions and lies, and playing with, the reality or the description of the story of what's real. So it includes using truth where it does not belong or is not applicable, so that the truth subtly turns into a lie without being easily traced as such, because it is presented under the guise of divine truth and seems unassailable. So this is a specific example. I don't know whether I can think of one of those in our world, but like certainly a lot of how Trump's base responds to him, kind of takes on that level a little. And maybe there's some ways that, like for me, like my opposition to, the truth or the presentation of that sort of world that, the we seem to be activating now and exploring, you know giving voice to. I'm not sure exactly, but it's like, there's a way in which, yeah, I do see it, as examining both, like how what they're doing, they provoke me into doing back to them. And then I have to examine my own conscience, right?
I
Because
think of it like um the Catholic, I was raised Catholic for a little while.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, I was always thinking I'm always sinning. I'm just gonna burn in a lake of fire. So it's like I'm just we're born into sin. We're just all I'm just born. I'm set up, to always fail because
Right,
of
right,
I'm a female, all this stuff, and
right,
also to let go of all that. But it was just like it reminds me of this. It's like there's maybe it started off with some truth, but now it just and then my mind actually carried on further on the religious basis. So at some
right.
point, it was just like, okay, forget it. I just gave it's like it's got to be something better than that because it's like born into sin, I'm sin. That's what I was taught, and it's just at some point it was just like forget it. It's like the bad broke. I used to break mirrors, and they like 7 years of bad luck. And at some point, I broke so many mirrors by accident. I said, "Oh, I'm just gonna have bad luck for many lifetimes." So I just gave up that belief because it was like it doesn't make sense. So that's kind of how I did the Catholic religion. It's like I still take some beliefs in some of the what I found to be truths, but it was just like it took a little bit and I felt like it just runs with it, with the guilt.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's all kind, yeah. And that's what the guide is saying, it's never like really, is it this or that? It's like, what's the truth and distortion on this side and what's the truth and distortion on that side? And you find the two truths and then they'll unify at the level of, what you're looking for, but when we try to say, well, is this right or is that right? Like it's a duality that we'll get lost in, because there's right and wrong on both sides. And if we can't, begin to understand and separate that out, we can't unify. And we're always kind of feeling like, we don't like either of the choices that we're given because neither of them are workable. Um, so yeah, and he's also saying here, I think, that the truth subtly turns into a lie without being easily traced as such. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's an awful lot of lies being presented out there and a lot of, we just don't even know the truth. I mean, ultimately, I think the only real truth is nobody knows. Like in some way, you know, I think the wisest place in any given moment in reality is, like unclear, don't know, it's like it's still forming, it's moving, and it's in process, it's like, and there's a way in which some of the ways that, for instance, like the immigrants are being painted, right, or other marginalized groups, right, it's like there's a lot of what I feel like are, confusion, distortion, maybe not even half truth, but like presented as truth, right? And so, and then right now, I mean, with AI and everything, one of the things that is one of the predictions is within the next couple of years, we will not be able to determine what's truth and what's not. Which is like, well, that's that principle, like in spades, right? So, and truth is important, and the guide says so many times when we're doing our own inner work, like, and we see that we've got these splits and we've got these two sides, and I got this part that, you know doesn't, hates Trump because he hates people, so, like, which one of us is really on top, I don't know, but there's this kind of way that when we get into like these places within us, we really are like trying to see, this truth. The guide is saying always, listen to the voices inside and hear what they each have to say, maybe if they're on two sides of the fence or whatever. But then we want to ask, what is the truth? And it's that question that usually I find then begins to naturally sort out, oh, well, there's truth on this side like this, but that's a false part of it, and there's truth and falsity. So it separates it out. But the question, what is the truth, is such an important question for our spiritual development and our healing internally and our transformation. So if we can't determine outer truth, hopefully this is also going to be a part of us learning to really go inside and learn how to discern and know our own being well enough to know within ourselves what truth is, right?
Yeah, and the cool thing is though, the truth evolves as our consciousness evolves. We
Mm-hmm.
see a bigger, as you see, like I'm a big David Hawkins, Dr. David Hawkins, Power versus Force. And I realized that as I've my spirituality has evolved out of so much, not as much duality. I've seen that, oh, there's everybody's truth is based on their level of consciousness and their level of vibration, how they perceive. And then it morphs and changes as we grow and have more experiences. And it's like, oh, so so it's like that's really fun.
That's what we're here for. Yeah, that's what we came here for, and hopefully, I mean, the problem is, and the guide says, like we get locked into, these patterns, and these defenses, and these, and so then the transformation that is natural to the life experience gets more limited because of that. And so the point is to be undefended and to be good students in a way, to be humble, to be curious, to be open, to, be able to feel and have an experience of our own life, and not numb out, not defend, not, feel like we have to, you know, either, be really sweet or really powerful or really separate or withdrawn or, like what is our way of keeping ourselves safe, and all of those ways actually limit our ability to grow and transform ourselves. And so
It's
like
hard to be in the world if you
yeah,
don't have like we feel like we're taught we have to have like pick a gender, pick a side, pick a what's your race, where'd you come from? And so it's hard to try to be amorphous or just be go with the flow because it doesn't conform with the current society. So it's like
yeah,
trying to navigate that. And it's like,
right.
well, what are you? A Democrat or a libertarian? I don't even know what I am. It's like I have no clue. What's your religion? I don't have religion no
And
more.
it's, I
So,
think it's for us now then, because that's the thing is we see, like this duality or these divisions or these, like labels and stuff, like they're not reality. Reality's nebulous. There's no, like, and what we want to be is what we are in each moment, which is going to change, right? So like all of this story and this definition and this, labeling and this, way of, it's like I think we came here to, and maybe going forward, the newer generations, to kind of like truly individuate and say, there are no categories. We're each unique. And, we're not this or that. We are here in the moment, and we are responding based on the call of spirit in that moment. And it's like, if we're, maybe we're called to serve in a certain way because we have that talent, or maybe that service isn't needed in that moment and somebody else is called and we're just holding space, or maybe we're not even there. So it's like we're always where we need to be, and we're always doing exactly what we need to be doing moment to moment. And kind of what I see is like, sort of, the mind is in the past and the future, and we bring the past into the future and we keep recreating it.
Mm.
And I think a lot of this transformational work that we're doing is learning to, unravel that past and understand it in a way, is like, it helps to have that. But then also more and more to, not be caught in it and just be here now. And in that presencing is where the divine angelic beings can guide us, can speak to us, can, guide us as we go. And so, and when we're in our hearts, and in that, then we're also above, I think, the temptations of the dark ones, or we've worked through stuff like that. So I think ideally, this evolutionary track that we're on will end up there, where we don't have all of these things that we have now, but each one is exactly where they need to be, exactly, doing what they need to do. And it will all just be a kind of way that the God within them flows out into the world. And, uh, and when we're truly our heart's nature and just this love, and we're no longer afraid and we're no longer defended, that won't be nearly as hard as it seems to be now. So that's kind of the vision that I have of where this is kind of being pointed to. And then there's a lot. Yeah, we just don't know. But I think that it is a huge transformation. I see it like, humanity right now is in a caterpillar state. And who knows how long it will be still in a caterpillar state. I'm hoping not as soon, or sooner than later, it's going to actually, go into a chrysalis and become a butterfly. But for now, we're still in that caterpillar state. But can you imagine if you were a caterpillar, you would have no concept of what it might be like to become a butterfly. You know, you would have to wait until it was actually something you experienced. And so, in the same way, we have no idea what it's going to be like on the other side of, living as a caterpillar. But I think, that the transformations that, we see in nature, caterpillar to butterfly, we have the dinosaurs into birds, it's like there's this beautiful, way that things seem to, um, become lighter and more beautiful, and, less damaging as they evolve. So it will be easy to see, my friends, how important it is for you to understand this now. You will find all these principles represented in your world around you and within your own lower self. You will see that it is negative intentionality, that in its negative intentionality, your own lower self contains all three principles of evil. So the negative intentionality is a certain aspect of our will, that wants the negative, right? And so that's the part of me when I get mad at Trump and, want to, I have pleasure in the fantasy of, hoping that he dies or something like that, right? And and yet that just adds to, that's the, an aspect of my own darkness. But we can't just suppress it. We can't just, say, okay, control yourself. That's not transformation. And so a part of what we have to do is keep studying and keep seeking within our own being. What is this pleasure that I get out of that? And is that really what I want? And, what would it be like? How could I understand this being? I mean, I actually had a kind of breakthrough moment at one point when I was realizing I was, describing sort of the um, kind of way that he is with other people, and I realized, oh, I bet that was exactly the way his father treated him. Like this kind of bullying and this kind of contempt and this kind of, rejection and this kind of hostility, and this putting down in these kind of really terrible petty ways. Like I bet that's exactly what he received from the person probably most influential and closest to him. So that helps a little bit. So anyway, but I feel like, like if I really truly want to live, in the Christ consciousness, that, even in these sort of understandable ways that my lower self still is present and, acting out, it's not that I want to control it, but I want to transform it. And, so it's kind of like, what is the higher road to this? How can I meet, history and politics and everything in the world, including computers and technology, which are one of the things that drive me the most crazy. So, how do we find a way to accept it as it is, conform ourselves to peace and let go of our, ways that we might feed off of our own negativity. And also to realize that all of the dark forces, all those negative specialists all around us, like that's part of why they provoke us or want us to go into these states, is because that's what they feed off of. They're like energy vampires. And when we get into our, harumpatudes or whatever it is, then they get a chance to, have this. It's a stronger vibrational, lower negative energy, and that feeds them, right? Gives them life force. So, um, so only when you become clearly aware of this can you recognize when devilish forces and spirits want to destroy you and inflict pain on you by enticing you to inflict pain on others. They also want to convince you of the illusion that you are separated and isolated, that neither God nor any life exists beyond the life of your present body. And finally, they want to drive you crazy with confusion, dualistic splits, false either-ors, half-truths, and subtle distortions that you cannot sort out. To recognize all of this is of tremendous value for you. You cannot deal with an enemy whose existence you ignore and whose weapons you cannot recognize. The time has come when you can clearly see how the corresponding type of distortion in the unpurified areas of your soul becomes an inevitably compelling field of attraction to powerful forces of evil that you can only neutralize and render harmless by your own determination to remain true to God. You can use the light of Christ to help you work within yourself and purify yourself so that this field of attraction within you can be transformed into a different magnet, attracting different forces. It must also be understood that these principles always coexist, but one may be stronger in manifestation at certain periods of history or during certain phases of an individual's life. It is the individual characteristics and personal inclinations of each entity that determine which of these three principles are most compatible with the individual in question. Collectively speaking, at different periods in the cycle of evolution, one or the other of these principles will be most prevalent. That does not mean that the other two principles will be absent. They all contribute to the ultimate aim of the forces of darkness to alienate creation from the Creator. So take that in for a minute. Like, this is their ultimate aim, to alienate creation from the Creator. And so, like I know still in as much of the deep spiritual work I've done, there's a part of me that, who's God? What's Christ? I don't connect in some way, right? Not, not to the truth of what it is. And so that's where I think, again, in our culture, like too much of spirituality has been, like listening to the belief or the faith or the teaching rather than the gnosis, the knowing of this within us, right? And so it's like that's our inheritance. That's our heritage, that we know the presence of the creator within each of us, and that we don't feel alienated, but we feel like, that's our resource and our source, and everything that we need we can, instead of feeling like we have to go hide and put a fig leaf over us or something, instead, when we feel like we screwed up or we did something wrong or we're in pain and we don't know why, or we feel, remorse or something, we need to run to the creator. We need to run to this connection. And that's why it helps me. I mean, we can think of it as universal force, we can think of it as the self within, but there's also this I thou, this way that the creator becomes the father, becomes the mother, the source of connectedness. And it's hard to connect to, the larger, you know, ultimate reality beyond the father mother kind of concept. So I like Ken Wilber. He talks about like having a first person, second person, and third person God. And like he talks about the first person being the God within, right? And then the second person is this I thou connection. And then the third person is to me like the Holy Spirit that is within all of creation, moving through all things. So here's an example of how the three principles interact: confusion and distortion of reality, making a truth out of a lie and a lie out of the truth, create a numbness toward the cosmic eternal aliveness that can be felt deep in the soul of any individual when there is truth and clarity. So, I mean, a lot of times we tune in and feel, like what's the state of your life force right now? Like tune in and see, like, how is the energy, the vibration that you're carrying now of just pure life force? Do you feel, some power or charge or energy or joy or interest or things like that? Um, that's naturally, there, unless there's, this kind of onslaught or numbness, this confusion and chaos, this suffering, um, our own pain, and then inflicting suffering. Like he says here, inevitably is created out of confusion and chaos. So this numbness, created out of confusion and chaos, inevitably inflicts pain and suffering, just as the lie must inflict pain and suffering. So numbness, lies, confusion, chaos, starting with any one of the three principles most prevalent in an individual and a conscious manifestation, you will see that they all must coexist and reinforce one another. So today's human mentality can accept the principle of good and evil more easily than the fact that they are both also personified. However, when the principle of good and evil is still often disputed, as if good or evil were merely subjective perceptions. And that's part of what has happened in sort of the postmodern world, is we kind of did lose the clarity and everything became relative. And it's part of, I think, what the right wing is reacting to in some of this, and maybe is the distortion somewhat on the left, but it is a kind of way that it's got to be more than subjective perception. And here again, we're dealing with a half truth. In fact, good and evil are often experienced on a very superficial level according to limited personal and highly subjective perceptions. So again, somebody thinks a gay person is bad or evil, and or somebody thinks, women are not so great or whatever. Like all of these things, are very highly subjective perceptions. When the issues are seen on a deeper level of consciousness, what was first believed to be good can often be seen as questionable and possibly as a mask of something evil. By the same token, what appears bad on the surface might turn out to be a very good experience or manifestation. So it is quite true that good and evil should be both viewed with caution and discernment and examined in as much depth as possible. However, it is a grave mistake to assume that because of this fact, good and evil do not exist in a very real way. The denial of good and evil as absolutes, in spite of the relative perception humans have of them, leads to nihilism, hopelessness, and the void, as if that were the ultimate reality. For quite a while, it was considered very fashionable and intelligent to postulate this nihilism. It obviously expresses the same separation from deeper and cosmic realities as the second principle of materialism. The confusion and half-truth inherent in the denial of absolute good and evil is an expression of the third principle, which breeds the second until that ultimately causes the first principle. In this age, humanity has made a step in the right direction because it begins to recognize that good and evil actually exist above and beyond the relativity of limited human perception. Humanity is open to accepting God as a creative principle and also sees the existence of another principle that countermands the divine creative principle. But people nowadays are still very hesitant to accept the fact that all principles can and do manifest as entities. It is as though you still hesitate to let yourself be called childish and primitive by people who believe themselves to be wiser and more knowledgeable when they ridicule other manifestations of reality. If personification of principles and creative forces did not exist, how could you exist as human beings? A human being is merely one form of personification. You personify both principles of good and evil, as you now know very well. Why should it be so hard to accept, or why should it appear so primitive and unintelligent to believe that along the scale of development there exist beings who manifest more or less of each principle? And finally, why should there not exist entities who manifest total goodness and total badness? In the latter instance, you may say that all created beings are ultimately divine, so they cannot be all bad. And this is true in a much wider sense. But it is possible that in their present state of manifestation, their divine core is so overlaid by evil that nothing of it manifests. We are here to deal with the fact that personification does exist in all gradations, and to deny this would be far from being knowledgeable or intelligent. Knowing that angels surround and influence you need not lead to worshiping the angels and overlooking Jesus Christ, the divine manifestation as personification, who is the ultimate source of all you need and of your life itself. You need not overlook that direct contact with Jesus Christ is what opens the channel of communication between him and you. Nor should such awareness of spiritual presence lead you to fear the devils you sporadically attract according to certain cyclic rhythms. Like all disease, the devils near you are cause, effect, and medicine. Their proximity and their effect on you is caused by your own unpurified, limited, and undeveloped consciousness. Your unpurified consciousness has the effect of drawing devils near you who confuse you with lies so that you no longer know what is truth and what is untruth. Your confusion induced by them can be used by you as a medicine if you so choose. You can use it as an indication that you need to develop and purify these unattended parts of your soul. Instead of fearing the devils or denying their existence so you can overcome your fear, you need to recognize their voices and learn to distinguish where these voices come from. This in itself a very necessary step in your development. If you ignore or deny their existence, how in the world can you become aware of them and counteract them? If you do not know that at times they surround you and inspire you, you unknowingly become their tool. If you do not consider that lies may be whispered into your thinking apparatus, you will not use your capacity to question and doubt the thoughts that filter through you. It is necessary to become aware of the connection between your lower self which, due to its ignorance, fear, and lack of faith, creates destructive defenses and negative intentionality, and the voices of satanic entities. Together, these two sources of negativity wreak havoc in your life and in the lives of those around you. The time has come when you need to know clearly, fearlessly, and intelligently what the facts of life are in this respect. Because the stronger you become in your higher self and its positive intentionality, while at the same time leaving certain aspects of the lower self unattended to, the more you become prey to evil influences. So the higher we go into the light, without sort of working with the lower self, the more dangerous in some way it can become. And then people that have a lot of light, often can fall in very serious ways, right? Um, Through pride, through, sort of a delusion of who they are as they, become more and more light filled, they might, you know, get delusional in that way. So, we become more prey to the evil influences who are much more concerned. See, they're more interested in us too, because they're concerned with you than those that are not particularly aware of the subliminal forces and whose life is not dedicated to God. So the more that we kind of align with God, the more we are also, working and realizing we're working in this spiritual level of this battle. And so that's part of why in the shamanic understanding of things, it's so important to work with our shadows, right? It's like, because they will be our downfall, if we advance and we don't, equally work with the shadow as we do with the higher self. Now is the time when you particularly need to know as much as possible of the enemy and its weapons so that you can combat the enemy force which is drawn toward you, to the degree that you do not heed these periods of contact and fail to decide to make them a medicine. So again, if we indulge them or blame something else for them or whatever, and don't understand that they're here for us, for our edification, that, we miss some of the, depths of the work that we can be doing. It is often not understood that Satan does not regard God. Let me try that again. It is often not understood. Okay. It is often not understood that Satan does not regard God, the source of all life, the creative principle of all universes, as the opponent against whom all his efforts in warfare are directed. Satan, the ultimate personification of all evil, containing all three principles personified as entities, recognizes God as creator and bends to his will and his laws. He cannot help doing so. It was God's will for evil to have its sphere of activity and influence, for only in this way can evil be truly overcome within the soul of all fallen spirits, all entities who have chosen thoughts and actions that plunge them into darkness. It is to ensure this ultimate overcoming of evil that very exacting laws and rules exist, preventing Satan from acting outside these laws. Definite limits are being set, always according to the will and choice of the individuals in question. I think I have made it quite clear how the interaction between an individual's lower self and evil spirits follows certain very definite laws. When one makes the effort to question one's own thoughts and to claim one's determination to follow the way of truth and light, the power of the spirits of lying instantly wanes. This may not be immediately discernible to the entity who cannot see the light of its own will to be in truth, nor can he see the entities surrounding him or feel their influence. The effect may come only some time later, but it must come. How often do you allow yourself to be submerged by thoughts of untruth and confusion and be drowned in them until their effect disconnects you from the spark of life, until you suffer the pain of untruth and confusion? This is sad because it is unnecessary. If God, the creative principle of all universes, is not the enemy of personified evil, who then is? Is it God in the manifest personification of the Christ? His light of truth. It is God in the manifest personification of the Christ. His light of truth and of eternal life is unbearable to all satanic spirits. This same light will inspire you with truth and life, will connect you with the source of all life, and will light up your path. But you must make the decision whether you wish the Christ light to shine on your way and make following the light of Christ your way, or whether you unwittingly wish to submerge yourself in thoughts of untruth and confusion, because momentarily this seems easier, perhaps even more pleasurable and exciting. Ultimately, you will fall into a state which you call depression, because you do not have the faith that Christ will come to help you with truth and clarification if you desire it. I'm going to just see how much more we have here to go. Let's see. Almost there. Okay. See if I can find where I was now. Satan's real opponent is Jesus Christ, who came to open a way for all creatures captivated and weakened by satanic influences. This has to do precisely with the fact of personification. When the Christ manifested God as man, thus being both divine and human, he accomplished the greatest feat imaginable. He proved that it was possible to remain true to God, true to truth, and not succumb to the strongest of influences and temptations that the personification of evil could unleash. Through this tremendous act of steadfastness, the man who was God manifest and the God who had put on human nature opened the doors in the souls of all created beings. He forged ahead, enabling those who were submerged in darkness to gradually find their way back to light. Jesus Christ has saved every single entity who was ever created, and every particle of consciousness and energy that ever manifested and will ever manifest as personality. Since he came to earth, the great light is always available for the building of a tunnel to the world of light. When satanic entities encounter the Christ light, they suffer physical pain. All divine attributes are contained in this light. But the light of truth stings evil spirits. The light of love is unbearably oppressive to them. And the light of positive aggression is fearsome and terrifying. Only God manifest can become visible and perceivable to other personifications. God's other aspect, the unmanifest divine principle, can only be indirectly experienced by personalized energy consciousness units. The great light of the cosmic Christ reaches a soul in darkness at first through pain. To some degree, all of you on this wonderful path have occasionally experienced this, to a much lesser degree, of course, than the dark spirits. You have come in touch with a reaction which at first seemed inexplicable, where you retract from happiness, fulfillment, pleasure, and love. You close up your centers of receptivity against God's abundance. First, this puzzles you, but later you learn to see and observe this reaction in you, just as you learn to observe any other irrational and destructive reaction. Often this seems to make so little sense that you become discouraged when you see the reaction in you again and again. You meditate, you visualize yourself being receptive to happiness, love, and fulfillment, yet this automatic reaction continues. It is not clear to you yet that the hidden part of your lower self that resists exposure and transformation is unable to allow the personality to stand the light. So a prayer is not enough. Neither is goodwill and meditation, visualization, and logic. None of them will make you really accessible to the light as long as there exists a hidden agenda in your soul. In that area, you react similar to demonic entities who hide from the light of Christ, which contains all happiness, eternal fulfillment, and life itself. Your hidden agenda makes you react with pain to Christ's light. And I, find that this is very true as well. And in my own experience, like, felt almost unbearable. And there was so much shame that kind of came in. And it wasn't even truthful shame in some way, but it was the, fear of this light that seemed, so advanced or so high. And in relationship, I was insignificant or bad in some way. And what that taught me in the long run, is like true humility, right? It's like, to the extent that I had too much pride, that uh, I could not, receive the light of Christ. And so, as we, humble ourselves, and we continue to do that. I'm not saying I'm totally humble. I mean, there's all kinds of pride that I see still, but it's within that process of awakening, and recognizing that, we have a resistance, to the light, and to keep working with that, right? That's all we're asked. We're not asked to be perfect. We're not asked to, get it all right. We're just asked to be conscious, and working as best we can, and within whatever, sometimes we're doing better than others. It's like, consistency is nice, but as human beings, we can't, and always do that. So we want to forgive ourselves. It's like there's this ever present forgiveness in this Christ spirit that understands how difficult it is. That experience that the Christ had as a personified human being, you know, is known, and there's a deep compassion and understanding of everything within us. And so when we observe our own similar reactions of contraction, restlessness, and anxiety, at the possibility of great pleasure and fulfillment coming to you, you can then connect with the principle I am trying to convey here. And that's how I experienced it as well. And you will understand very well what I mean when I discuss the demonic spirit's flight from Christ's light. And you will also comprehend what history has tried to convey again and again, that Christ is the great adversary of Satan. What exists in microcosm within the human soul also exists in the macrocosm. Every inner drama is a reflection of an outer drama, and vice versa. Every battle within the human soul between the forces of light and darkness, between the higher self and the lower self, is also waged on a universal level, enacted by many entities at different stages of development. Every personality goes through this battle within himself or herself. Every personality experiences it occasionally in his or her surroundings. And last but not least, every personality will become involved in larger issues that also represent the universal battle between good and evil. The individual's role in this battle, on whatever level it takes place, very much depends on his or her conscious, deliberate choice of where he or she wants to be. When issues are tinged by personal emotions, desires, or interests that belong to the realm of darkness, and those personal emotions are not recognized as fogging the vision, then one truly becomes a target for one or all of the three principles of evil. Cruelty will be hidden under the guise of expressing your feelings, while maligning and distortion will become the tools of cruelty and the intention to hurt. Disconnection from deeper reality will blind you to the true meaning of events. Confusion will be rampant, so that truth will be used for lying and lies will be called the truth. The forces of evil have been allowed to find entrance through your lower self, which you have not dealt with sufficiently. My dearest friends, do not allow yourself to become enmeshed in this battle. Do not unwittingly lend yourselves as tools for the aims of the Prince of Darkness. Use your goodwill to see the truth. See both the truth of your hidden lower self motives and the truth of your higher self. The truth is the divine. So even if we're seeing the truth of the lower self, that's the divine awareness, right? And the truth of your higher self goodwill. And give up the line of least resistance and its negative pleasure, which makes you persist in a destructive course, bringing clouds of pain and darkness to you and those around you. The key is really quite simple. It is so tempting to follow negative thoughts and come to believe them. It furthers a lower self-fixation to indulge in the negative pleasure of negative thoughts, suspicions, blames, and accusations, which may or may not be true. Raise the pertinent questions. The first would be, what is the truth here? I want to know the real truth. The second question is, do I want to know the truth in this or that issue? If you can, those seem the same to me. Hold on. The first would be, what is the truth here? I want to know the real truth. The second question is, do I want to know the truth in this or that issue? I guess just more specifically, do I want? Do I really want to know the truth? I guess that's what the question is. So, what is the truth here? And then, do I really want to know the truth? That's the second question. If you can answer these two questions truthfully and in depth, you will dispel the clouds of darkness which carry the three principles of evil. Clarification will come when the truth is really wanted, even if a part of the truth at this moment is still that you do not want the truth, that you want to attack, to blame, to see people or events in the worst light. The reason why you secretly wish this can only be explored when you no longer deny feeling this way. The truth will shimmer through slowly but inexorably. Once you admit a negative intentionality, which then attracts expert spirits of lying and of confusion, clarity will dissolve the pain of your true guilt that is frequently not allowed to surface. You keep it down by strengthening the destructive process of projecting on others what you fear in yourself. Clarity will also help dissolve the pain you inflict on others with this evil projection. Do not ever delude yourself into believing that negative intent and negative thoughts do not inevitably reflect in your actions and affect others in an insidious way. Thoughts can never remain separated things. They create results and events in one form or another. The clarity which comes from honestly pursuing and answering the above questions after you have delved into your hidden thought processes, which are seldom completely unconscious, that will dissolve the pain. It will establish your connection with eternal life. My beloved friends. So that's kind of like facing it, and being willing to examine it and, being that curious, open, compassionate, guide within us, our own higher self, our own divine self, to explore all of the other aspects of our being and not to, judge them. The higher self doesn't judge, it just simply acknowledges. And in the acknowledgement, this is part of this, focusing process, we find then integration. And in the integration, the balance can come back and the extremes can fade away. So, there's definitely ways of working with all of this, and it just requires a conscious awareness of our ongoing states of consciousness. My beloved friends, you are all reaching the point in your development when taking responsibility for your creation must be combined with a profound knowledge of the invisible worlds and the laws according to which you attract or repel entities of different nature and development, who then influence you and reinforce the force field within your soul. Each of the many areas of your soul may be influenced by the highest or the lowest forces. The choice is up to you. It is also important to understand that a person does not experience temporary evil influences because he or she is undeveloped, evil, or bad. One individual may be more accosted by evil even though what needs to be purified in his or her soul may be much less dark than another person's soul substance, who may be less accosted by demonic influences. I mean this in an absolute sense. The law of attraction and repulsion is purely relative here. For example, if you've reached a comparatively high level of development, the areas which remain to be transformed are not recognized by your consciousness, even though they may be particularly destructive or outright wrong. They exert through their unrecognized parts a greater attraction to evil than does the negative charge of a person who is on an altogether lower plane of development. So it would be good if you pondered this law and could feel into it an understanding of it. So does that make sense? Right? Like, again, it's kind of like the more light we have, the more the dark forces want to bring us down. We're a bigger prize. And so they're
You know,
going to,
in church, they used to say, when you get baptized, that you get a lot more demonic activity or attacks because of, now you're on that path to the
yeah,
Christ
you're on the,
consciousness. And I
right.
found that personally, that was true. It was like, what was going on? Or like when you get Reiki attunement, they say all your your stuff starts coming up each level of attunement, and so you have to deal or face your shadows, and
Right.
you get challenges and all that. Yeah. So
Exactly. And there's a way, in a sense where, again, the higher we go, the more important it is for us to connect to the divine spirit, right? And to really anchor ourselves, with our protection, with our guides, our guardian angels, Christ. And so I think we're here closing. So let's finish this a little bit. Let's see. The law of attraction and repulsion is purely okay. We read that. So with this, my dearest friends, I give all of you the blessings of truth and love. The light I bring is always the light of Christ. He has said he is the truth, and he is the way, and he is life. In this light, you find the way to truth in the smallest and largest issues, in personal and impersonal issues. This way leads to the love of the Creator who has given eternal life. Eternal life can be found only in truth. The way to the truth leads to the mazes of the dark areas in your own soul. Through encountering the temptation to remain in them and savor their passing gratifications. Through the deliberate overcoming of this temptation. The great Christ light is the overpowering love of the Creator of creation of all that is. Be blessed. Choose this way. Okay, so that's all like a heavy, intense, and very metaphysical, or you know, uh, sort of a spiritual lesson. How did that go with you, Chuck? Are you aligned in any of that, or is that stuff that's a little too far out for your understanding at this time? Or
I think in non-dual sense, it's both.
uh-huh, I agree. Yeah. I find, I'm the same way. Like, it's like it just, the more different ways we can kind of parse this or see it, through different lenses, the more that we see of it. It's like it's always everything and in some way. And there is a kind of usefulness, I think, in sort of approaching things from this lens and at certain times and in certain, you know, sort of experiences. And then, yeah, there's all of these other understandings. And I don't know exactly what you meant in your non-dual thing, but part of it is like to me, sort of Western shamanism has this sort of movement from duality into unity, but it does have a dualistic kind of thing, and then it also sort of tries to say, well, it's all an illusion. Right? But then
Yeah,
it says we can't just dispel the illusion by not, agree, by disbelieving in it. We have to go in and work with it. So interesting paradoxes.
right. I think it's just, it's both fantastical to me and resonates as well. So
Good. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of, I like the guide's lecture on the cosmology. I can't remember if you were in on that, but it's like there's those four lectures, and it's very, cosmological and all of that. And to me, these things, I like myth. I like Michael Meade. I like, Robert Bly. I like understanding archetypes and myths and personifications of things, and it just, seems to add a dimension that I, enjoy. So and then energetically, it kind of resonates. It's like, yeah, I can recognize that in my own journey, and that kind of thing. And so, how about anybody else? I'm gonna have a last word before we close here. How is that for you, Miko? Seemed kind of appropriate to some of the discussion we were having earlier. Did it confuse things or help things?
Yeah, I'd say it helped things. Where I kind of got confused a little bit is the kind of like a path through that to make yourself free of it or less susceptible to it.
Yeah.
I know it said something like ask the question, like the truth, like what is the truth? And that's like also like the first step, you know.
Right.
But beyond that, I'm a little bit like
Right.
a
It's sort of
little,
like examine the conscience is the first
yeah,
lesson. right? Examine the consciousness, right? What's going on? What am I doing? And
Yeah, to me that sounds like logic, kind of like what is the evidence around me? Like what is,
well, it's
you
kind
know,
of like no, like what like what are the voices in your head saying to you, and are they the truth?
Or like what would, like saying what would Jesus do, but what would God, what if it, so if you think of God as love or whatever higher source, would that be of God? Is, I mean,
Yeah,
all of it's of God, but is it following along that path of light and love, or
right.
is it like I'm so terrible, I can't believe, a lot of us we have that negative self-talk,
Self-judgment,
or the
right?
ego keeps
Say,
on
yeah,
you
yeah,
you failed, or you need to make all this money, or you're this old and you haven't achieved this and that.
right.
Is
Yeah,
that's true in this society, but is it really true for our soul or spirit? No, because we've evolved. So if you look at it from a godlike perspective, everything is in divine order. It's perfect for where we're at right now. So
exactly.
that's kind of how I think, but it's hard to get into that thinking when like you're facing bills and a job that sucks, or a boss that's riding on you, or family illness, or you're just dealing with illness. It's like, well, how is this? How do I see? And you just practice as best as we can, but because all of it's for our higher soul involvement and good eventually.
Right.
But
is that
sometimes
enough to examine the consciousness?
Hmm?
Is
Say,
that kind of like enough to examine the consciousness?
well,
that's
I
a good
think
start.
Yeah.
it's the first step for sure. And then
Okay.
the other thing is what we find there, we need to understand it, right? And we need to recognize it clearly, like she's saying, is this of the light or is this of the darkness, right? And then we have to choose, and we have to see maybe where we're sort of addicted to the darkness, or we have temptation to be aligned with that, and understand these parts of us, because usually those were the parts that got traumatized, so we can go in and we can also do all of this work that we're doing here, hold a child, like repair the history, do some other things, but mostly, the it's kind of like this free will, and we can't really have free will until we know what's inside of us, or what we're doing, or what's what our all the parts of us are doing, right? So like you're saying before, which part are you going to feed, but first you also have to know which part is you know asking you to be fed. Right? And
They Eckhart and them talk about David Hawkins, and the Course of Miracles talks about just observing your thoughts. Try
mm,
to step back and just don't have an opinion on them. Just listen and watch them. They become eventually like clouds in the sun. We're the sun, we're the spirit, and the clouds just move and do what they do, and they come and go, but eventually
right,
they kind of,
yeah.
dissipate. And
And
the
in
more
some
you
ways,
practice
almost
that,
all
the
our
more you can
thoughts,
see
right?
it.
Yeah, and our thoughts are just, like, and so in some ways, to be in the here and now, any thought we're having, right? We would kind of like let just release and dissipate. But if we're actually doing the work of examining our conscience, then I think it's like not just letting them dissipate, it's understanding. And so this is that focusing, and it's like focus, which is going in. And I notice some part of me, is feeling this or speaking this or acting this way, and to not judge it, but be curious and try to understand, who are you? What do you feel? Go into your energy body and notice, like we talked before about, like the fruits, of thoughts. And so you're having a thought. How does it feel in your body? What does it do to
Mhm.
your energy? Right. And then you can go in there, and that's the work. So it's kind of all we're doing here, and in the ceremonies as well. So, the answer is not like I can't just give you like a well, this and this and this,
Sure,
and
sure. Yeah, of
yeah.
course.
But does
Nothing,
that make
most
sense?
things
Do you
aren't
have a
like that way.
yeah.
Hmm.
Byron Katie, she has
Mhm.
this thing, you can probably look it up. It's some questions you can ask yourself, and she literally named it the work. But it's kind of like what you just said, Darlene. She actually, and if you do the questions, like she has it, like it's like three questions, I believe. But as you do it for each situation, it helps you to look. It's amazing how simple the questions are and how you start seeing
What is
your
it
thought
called?
pattern. The
Byron
Work
Katie
by
is
Byron Katie.
yeah.
Byron Katie.
Byron Katie.
Byronkatie, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I
And
see.
the work.
Just kind of how it
Yeah.
sounds, Byron.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and you
Katie.
might,
Okay.
she's another, interesting person with a good technique that you might see if it's useful for you. It's like, the way that I go in, it's like I have this pack work background, and so those are the questions that I end up using to ask, but she has some very, and it's more like whether this thing is real or not, or, like, and, so we can at least kind of shift out of our identification with something. But that's where I like, in this other process where we're, like we're identifying with our observer self, our self in presence, and then from there we're, having compassionate interactions with all of these other parts and trying to, understand what they believe and then trying to help guide them to a higher truth. And so at some point, when we really understand what they believe, then maybe the Byron Katie questions or, some of these other, pathwork sort of, oh, I see, that's kind of like um, an idealized self-image, right? And so, you know, what is, it says, I'm a terrible person. Well, is that true? Right? And from one perspective, that's all we see, but that's not the whole truth. We come from these sort of little tiny, or these different facets of our being, and perceive ourselves, and what we're trying to do is recognize, oh, all of those are just aspects, and who we really are is the divine self within. And as we begin to identify with that instead of all of the other parts of us, then we can work with them, transform them, heal them, that kind of thing.
And you can also start seeing that other people are on their own. So it starts creating a forgiveness and understanding of why people do what they do and
Right.
letting them just do whatever. Like in AA, they call it whirl, let the whirling dervishes whirl. You just let them do whatever and you just let them be versus being impacted by their opinions and thoughts all the time and
Right.
letting that, create all these clouds again. So
Yes.
it creates that space to kind of start saying, hey, look at this,
Exactly.
and then examine and look at it. Like I think Eckhart Tolle, like he likes to says these are pointers, they're just pointers for the way we're kind of trying to look inside and see.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good group. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And your explanations, I appreciate it, darling. Your
Yeah.
interpretations is
Yeah.
really
There's,
enlightening too.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Great.
All
See you
right.
in a couple
Have a
weeks.
good night.
Good night.
Namaste, everyone. Have a
Namaste.
wonderful week.